Chapter 4. Mike and Todd didn't become full-fledged respected members of the Union Army quite so easily. They parted company with the sutler at the close of 4 in the morning on the dark streets of Kansas City. He advised them that Major Samuel Sturgeon's battalion still ought to be camped on the outskirts of town. As the sutler disappeared from view, Mike and Todd stared down at the dark and deserted street, and then at each other. "How are we supposed to reach the outskirts?" Todd asked. Mike had to smile at Todd's question, which he knew Todd would never have asked if he wasn't so scared as Mike felt at the moment. "We go in that any direction," Mike told him, "except east. East would take us across the river into Missouri." "We came from the north," Todd said, beginning to collect himself. "Do you think the sutler drove near the encampment where while we were sleeping?" Mike blushed at having laughed at the sutler falling asleep. "It's our best guess," he answered. He turned toward what he hoped was the west. "Let's head west for a ways. Turn north." They began to walk down the street, and their path lit only by the stars. The street narrowed to a lane, and an elderly woman bent under her shawl as she swept her porch in the first rays of early light called out, "Where are you boys off to?" "Find the 2nd Kansas Infantry," Todd shouted. The woman shook her fist at him. "Go home and behave yourselves, you abolitionists." "Ma'am, this is Kansas, free state," Mike answered in amazement. "Free? I'll tell you what freedom is. Till Abraham Lincoln was elected president, this was a free country where every citizen had the right to follow his own beliefs." She screeched. "Go home. Go along with you." Mike and Todd hurried down the lane, turning north when they came to a wagon road. They followed the road for what seemed like a long while, till it rose and curved over a hill. Below them, between the hill and the Missouri River, they saw an encampment for which they'd been searching. Across the plains spread rows and rows of canvas tents, from small pup tents to large tents used for administration. Already mounted traffic filled the makeshift roads, some of the riders dressed with high crowns, plumed hats, gold-trimmed jackets, and bright blue trousers of the dragoons. Blue uniformed figures as small as ants bustled in all directions. Whirls of dust and plumes of smoke from the cooking fires cast a gray haze over the drill unit that already had formed, marching about a drumbeat. Todd drew a sharp breath, but Mike knew there was no time to be nervous. "There they are, Todd," he said, "just waiting for us to go with them before they march off into battle. Won't take long to get down there and sign our loyalty to the Union." "There must be close to 2,000 of them," Todd said. "Those Rebs won't stand a chance." Mike glanced around at a footpath that wound down the hillside. "Come on," he said. "This looks like the quickest way down the hill. You ready?" "Ready," Todd answered. The path left the roadway was steep, but Mike and Todd managed to half climb, half slide down the length of it. Finally, they landed on the flat plain close to the southern boundary of the camp. Brushing dust from their pants and tugging their jackets into place, they walked briskly toward a cluster of soldiers where a muscular sergeant stood behind a makeshift desk, checking lists and announcing assignments. He seemed to be the right man to approach. As he and Todd stepped close, Mike could sense the man eyeing them curiously. He heard the occasional snicker of amusement. Mike nervously clung to the drum hanging in place on his neck, extending it to its proper length just above his knees. The drum had brought him here, and the drum was going to assure his acceptance as an army musician. The sergeant looked over his papers, his glance sweeping over Mike and Todd before it rested on the drum and the bugle. "Musician, are you?" he asked Todd. "Yes, sir," Todd said. "Bugle and drum." "How old are you?" Mike could hear Todd gulp before he answered. 16, sir." And the sergeant raised an eyebrow, but once began to rummage through his papers. He pulled out a form, which he handed Todd. "Colonel Mitchell's got a standing request for musicians. Pays $12 a month, which is when we've got it. Right now we haven't got it. Sign here for a 90-day stint. Write musician after your name and report quick as you can to Sergeant Porter. Pick up your uniform and supplies. You'll find him at the end of the row of tents." "Yes, sir," Todd exclaimed. He scribbled his name before glancing back at Mike. "See you later," he called, and hurried off to the supply sergeant. Grinning, the sergeant who had signed Todd up bent down face to face with Mike and said, "Sonny boy, you've got to know you're way too young to join the army." Mike tried to stand as tall as he could. "I look young for my age, but I'm 16. The sergeant guffawed at some of the men standing nearby. "16, is it? I'm telling you, you're not a day over 13. "I hear you need musicians," Mike said. "What does it matter how old I am if I'm needed? What matters is there's rules we got to go by. Now run along home, Sonny. Your mama's going to be worried about you." With that, the sergeant turned away from Mike, busying himself with a group of men who approached the table. Mike didn't budge. "I can't go back," he told himself in desperation. "The army has to take me. It has to." He slipped his drumsticks in his pack, straightened his back, and began to beat out the drill calls for advance and retreat. "Hey, now, what's this?" the sergeant yelled down, but the flap of the nearby tent opened and a Union officer stepped out. He watched Mike for a moment and strode to stand by the sergeant. He held up a hand for silence, and Mike obeyed instantly. "Captain Dawes, sir," the sergeant said. "I'll send this young rapscallion packing." "Not so fast," the captain said. He studied Mike. "What's your name, son?" "Michael Kelly, sir. Everyone calls me Mike." "Where you come from, Kelly?" Mike's thoughts lurched from the captain to Mrs. Taylor, his home in Fort Leavenworth, to his ma, living in St. Joseph, his first home with Ma and Da and 5 brothers and sisters in New York. Captain Dawes was waiting for an answer. Mike took a deep breath and said, "Came west out of New York City on one of the orphan trains, sir." "I've heard the orphan trains," the captain answered. He studied Mike. "So you're an orphan, no family." No, Mike hadn't meant to deny his family. While he was fumbling for the right words, the captain said, "How old are you?" "I am not exactly 16, Captain Dawes," Mike started. The captain smiled. "Nor even 14, he said. "You know the calls?" "Yes, sir." "Is that your drum?" Mike held it up proudly. "It was given to me as a soldier who brought it through the Indian Wars." "Sir, the age rule," the sergeant began. Captain Dawes interrupted. "Age rule applies to regular soldiers, Sergeant Gridley. Musician isn't a regular soldier. He doesn't carry a gun. My unit's in sore need of a musician. Sign up, Mr. Kelly. Have him report to me in uniform on the parade ground in half an hour." Mike could hardly keep from jumping and shouting with joy. "Thank you, Captain Dawes," he managed to stammer. He bent to sign the paper that Sergeant Gridley shoved under his nose. He felt a great goodwill toward everyone, even Sergeant Gridley. But before Mike could even open his mouth to say so, Gridley barked, "You can inquire about the supply Sergeant might have for you, Mikey boy. Afraid it won't be much. Far as I know, we don't order uniforms in children's sizes. From what you're wearing, I'd guess he has a good stock of wide-bottom pants," Mike shot back. As some of the soldiers in earshot guffawed, Mike hurried away, following the route Todd had taken. He'd come to fight the Rebs, not loud-mouthed sergeants. He reminded himself it certainly didn't make sense to take on a man 3 times his size. In a few moments he found the supply sergeant, who groaned when he saw the size of the newly appointed musician. "You'll need a sturdy belt to hold up the small size of pants we got," he said. I can't do much about a jacket without rolling up the sleeves." "I'm growing fast," Mike said. "Not fast enough," supply sergeant said. He went through his stock, finally came up with an oversized drawers and socks, a jacket, pants, forage cap, and a musician's brass bugle on the front, a canteen, a woolen blanket, a rubber blanket. "I can't help you with boots," he told Mike. "We didn't get any boots. How some of these men are going to march for miles in shoes that are falling apart, well, never mind. Report to Sergeant Gridley for your assignment. Though he hasn't got enough tents, you'll find yourself sharing with at least 3 other men, maybe 4. When one man rolls over, everyone rolls over." Mike laughed. The supply sergeant shook his head sadly. "What does it matter?" Mike thought. "The weather's warm. I can make a bed outside under the stars." Slapping his cap on his head, making sure the brim dipped over his forehead as a jaunty angle, Mike carried his supplies back to Sergeant Gridley, who grinned as he gave Mike his tent assignment. Thankful the sergeant was a man who could take a joke, Mike easily found the tent and changed to his uniform. As the supply sergeant had warned, Mike had to roll up his sleeves and his pant legs. He felt as though he were dressed in Captain Taylor's clothes. "I may not fill your shoes yet, but some day I'll make you proud of me," he thought to himself. Out on the parade ground, Captain Dawes took one look at Mike and said, "Can you use a needle and thread?" "No, sir," Mike said. He tried to ignore the grins and joking comments the men assembled for drill, but his face burned with embarrassment. "We'll find someone who can," Dawes told him. "We'll do our best to outfit you the way a soldier should be outfitted. Now let's get these men in shape. Sound the call for drill, Mr. Kelly." "Yes, sir," Mike said, grateful for this fine man. He was determined to do Captain Dawes' bidding forever. He'd stand by his side, drumming the calls in the thick of battle. Mike flourished his drumsticks and beat out the sharp roll that signaled the men to fall into line and stand at attention. For half an hour they worked until the men learned to interpret the drum beats that carried their officers' instructions, from advance to retreat. "Good work, Mr. Kelly," the captain said at the end of the drill, loudly enough for the troops to hear. "Thank you, sir," Mike answered. He reddened again, but this time with pleasure. Then Captain Dawes announced, "Tonight we're going to go. It'll be a good time to write letters to those you've left at home. Tomorrow, under Major Sturgis's command of the 4th Battalion, our 2nd Kansas Infantry will begin the trek to southern Missouri to join forces with General Lyon's brigade." Mike vaguely heard Captain Dawes say the march would involve more than 2,000 men just in the 4th Brigade alone, but Mike's mind was on the letters he needed to write. He'd left one for Louisa, but by all rights he needed to tell Ma what he'd done. He couldn't leave out Francis and Petey and Meg and Danny and Peg. He needed to know they were thinking of him and praying for him. Good thinking to have tucked writing supplies in his pack. No matter what, Mike promised himself he'd write those letters before lights out. But soon Mike saw that finding time to write letters would be more difficult than he imagined. Nor did he have time to search for Todd and share his good news that he was now a member of the Union Army too. Immediately after supper, Sergeant Gridley cornered him. "You don't think your work's over, do you, boy? Any soldier bold enough to talk back to superior certainly must have the energy to carry water for the horses and firewood for the cook. And when you're done with that, there's more to do." So the sergeant wasn't open to a bit of fun, Mike thought. He'd have to be more careful to keep his mouth shut about wide-bottom pants and such in the future. Not until after drumming tattoo, the evening roll call designed to discourage deserters, could Mike escape his chores for the night and head to the tent. To his surprise and delight, Todd was there, spreading his rubber blanket on the ground. A burly corporal with a dark beard as thick as a bush laughed and said to Mike, "Sergeant Gridley thought you boys would like to be together." He held a hand as big as a beefsteak to Mike and then to Todd. "Name's Harley Botts." The 2 other men squeezed in the tent, and Corporal Botts introduced the other 2 tent mates, a lanky, straw-haired 18-year-old named Ben Doland, and a shorter, plumper, balding man named Billy Whitley. And then, to Mike's surprise, Harley pulled a needle and thread and scissors out of his jacket pocket. "Volunteer to do something to make that uniform fit you, and might better, Mike. Take off the jacket, I'll see what I can do." "You can sew?" Mike asked. He'd seen women take dainty stitches as they darned and mended, but the idea of a huge man doing the same thing was astounding. It's a skill that came in handy more often than not, Harley said. He proceeded to fold, bend, cut, and stitch with a needle for what that almost disappeared between his large thumb and forefinger. Mike watched fascinated. By the time Mike's pants were taken into the waist and shortened at the legs, Todd filled him in on what he had done during the day. Not half size as much as I had to, Mike grumbled. He explained his run of Sergeant Gridley. Todd whooped with laughter, but Harley reminded the boys that a well-run army was called for a firm military order among the troops. Sergeant Will Gridley's a fair man, Harley said, his twinkle in his eyes softened to seriousness as his words. It's best you keep a civil tongue in your head, Michael. I will, he assured Harley, but Mike's repentance was about short-lived as Ben and Billy joined the conversation about what life in the army was like for volunteers. There'll be bugs in the bedding and how they bite. Don't be expecting home cooking. You just as easy chew through a harness as through some of the meat we get. And they had another bit of good-natured gossip about one officer or another, and even Harley couldn't help but smile. The companionship made Mike feel a real part of the Union Army, bedbugs and all. Hearing Todd chuckle, Mike was sure that Todd felt the same way. Harley informed the boys that Todd be directly under Colonel Mitchell's command, and Mike under the same command, but with Captain Dodd's troop. Together they'd be part of the 2nd Kansas Infantry, and they'd leave in the morning on a march to fight the Rebs. Tomorrow, Todd said. Tomorrow, Mike echoed, his heartbeat quickening. He reached into his pack for his writing supplies. With a war to be won, who knew what he'd next find time to write?